The night I told my son I'd won $33 million, he hugged me with cold arms. The next day, he shoved me out of my own house and said, "Old man, you can't handle this kind of money." The pain stung deeper than any wound. After all I'd sacrificed, I was nothing but an obstacle to him. But what he didn't know was that I'd signed the ticket at the store counter, kept the receipt, and called a lawyer who owed me a favor. When she walked through my door with the evidence in her hands, my son's smile cracked, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Want to know what happened when the truth hit the courtroom? Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I know how far my voice has reached. The gas station was nearly empty that late afternoon. Early spring in Houston always carried a mix of cool air and the faint promise of summer heat. I stepped inside for a tank of gas and a cup of coffee, and on impulse, slid a couple of dollars across the counter for a lottery ticket. The clerk hardly looked up, just tore it off the roll and handed it over. It was nothing. Really, a small act. The way I sometimes bought scratch-offs to kill the quiet of evenings alone. That night, the ticket sat on the kitchen table beside a plate with the last of yesterday's cornbread. I turned on the small lamp by my recliner, the one Odessa always used to read under. The lottery drawing was already over. I pulled the numbers up slowly, almost lazily, as though it was just routine. One by one, the numbers matched. First the first 3, then 4, then 5. My hand froze when the 6th fell into place. The screen glowed, the numbers lined up perfectly, and my breath caught. For a long moment, I couldn't even swallow. $33 million. It didn't feel real. My chest felt light, almost hollow, like air had rushed in too fast. I pressed the ticket between my palms as though it might vanish. Odessa's voice came back in memory, as clear as if she were still here. "Take care of the family. Hollis, that's all I ask." A smile crept across my face, not from greed, but from the thought that maybe God had seen fit to give me one last tool to mend the cracks in this family. I whispered into the quiet living room, "Thank you, Lord." For a while I just sat, the hum of the ceiling fan above filling the silence, imagining what this could mean. Maybe Carver would smile again the way he used to as a boy. Maybe there would be Sunday dinners with laughter. I let hope bloom, foolish or not. After staring at the ticket too long, I reached for the phone. My hands trembled. Not from age this time, but from the sheer weight of it all. Carver deserved to be the first to know. Maybe this news would be the bridge between us. The phone rang barely once before he answered. "Dad?" His voice was sharp, like he'd been expecting the call. "I need you to come by," I said, trying to steady myself. "Something's happened. Something big." He arrived faster than I thought possible. His car door slammed, and a moment later he was at the porch, barely letting me open the door before stepping inside. His hug was firm, but there was no warmth in it, no softness of reunion. His eyes, darting past me toward the kitchen table, gleamed with something else. I told him, showed him. The words barely out of my mouth before he snatched the ticket from the table, staring at it like it was oxygen. His grin spread wide, but his eyes stayed cold. "Dad," he said, gripping my shoulder with fingers too tight. "This changes everything. We'll need to manage it right. No mistakes. No waste." I tried to laugh, to break the tension, but it came out thin. "I thought we might celebrate first." "Sit down, have a toast. Your mama would have—" He cut me off, already pulling out his phone. "We need to think about accounts, trusts, taxes. Do you even know where the payout office is?" His thumbs tapped across the screen before I finished the sentence. The table I'd set felt foolish. 2 glasses stood ready. The good crystal Odessa had left behind. I poured sweet tea into mine and lifted it halfway, hoping he'd look up, but he was already dialing. "I'll handle everything," he said between calls, his tone clipped. "Don't worry about a thing." The grin never reached his eyes. When he asked where I'd keep the check, his voice sharpened. "You didn't put it somewhere careless, did you?" My throat tightened. I forced a smile, nodding. "Don't you worry." But the joy I'd felt earlier had drained away, replaced by a quiet unease settling deep in my chest. I went to bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles. The blessing felt fragile, as though it could slip away before it even began. The words slipped out in a whisper, the kind only walls hear. Why did it feel like he wasn't happy for me, but for himself? Sleep wouldn't come, just the hum of the fan, and the weight of something darker settling over the house. The next evening, the quiet of my brick house was broken by the sound of the front door creaking open. I hadn't invited anyone, but Carver strode in as if the place already belonged to him. His hands gripped a polished black folder, edges sharp, corners crisp. He didn't waste time with greetings. "Dad," he said, his voice clipped, controlled. "I've got everything we need to make this right. Just sign, and we'll be safe from taxes, leeches, scams, everything." The folder slid across the kitchen table with a soft thud. I stared at it as though it were a loaded gun. Suspicion rose in my chest, but I kept my tone steady. "Carver, what is this?" He waved a dismissive hand. "Just standard paperwork. Don't make it complicated. The sooner we do this, the better." The neat rows of text blurred as my eyes moved across the pages. The language was dense, foreign, clauses and subclauses I couldn't untangle. Every line looked like a trap waiting to be sprung. Carver leaned forward, tapping the table rhythmically, the impatience seeping out of him. "Don't overthink it. Trust me. Dad, I've already handled the research." A flicker of Odessa's voice rose in memory. "Always read before you sign. Hollis, never let someone rush you." That whisper of her guidance steadied my hand. I pushed the papers back an inch. "Give me time to understand this. I don't sign what I don't read." Carver's jaw tightened, though the corners of his mouth held the ghost of a smile. "Dad, you're making this harder than it needs to be. You're too old to be dealing with these things." "That's what I'm here for." The sting landed deeper than I expected. Too old, as if years of labor, sacrifice, and keeping food on his plate counted for nothing now. I squared my shoulders. "This is still my money. My life." For the first time, his mask slipped. The smile vanished, replaced by sharp edges in his voice. "Your life? Dad, you don't have a clue how the world works anymore. You'll ruin everything if you don't let me handle it." The refrigerator hummed loudly in the silence that followed. My chest tightened as though the walls themselves had shifted. This wasn't my son protecting me. This was a man treating me like a roadblock. Carver finally scooped up the papers with a rough flick, muttering, "We'll get it done my way." Then he walked out, leaving the kitchen colder than it had been before he arrived. The empty chair across from me mocked the hope I had clung to. My fingertips brushed the smooth surface of the table where those pages had rested. Words slipped out in a whisper meant for no one but the still air. "Is this what winning looks like?" The phone buzzed beside me. A message from Carver lit the screen. "We'll do this my way, one way or another." The morning light slipped through the blinds, casting faint stripes across the old armchair that had molded itself to my shape over the years. Sleep had been no friend. The echoes of Carver's words gnawed at the quiet. Coffee steamed in the chipped mug Odessa used to favor, and her photo on the mantel caught the glow, almost as if she were listening. Whispering to that frame came as natural as breathing, asking what she'd think of this mess, remembering the days when she pressed my hand and said, "Keep going, Hollis, for the boy." Those memories returned sharp and clear. Long nights at the plant, double shifts when my body begged for rest, all so Carver could have a decent pair of shoes, or tuition when I could barely cover groceries. The sacrifice had always felt worth it, until last night, when my own son's voice carved me down, branding me too old to stand guard over what little fortune life had handed me. The knock at the door startled me from the haze. Darnell stood there, broad smile warming the porch like he always did. He'd been the steady one, not tied to me by blood, but bound by loyalty carved from years of neighborly kindness. "Morning, Mr. Hollis," he said, stepping inside with that easy energy. "Thought I'd check in on you. You look like you've been carrying the world on your back." The words nearly broke me. I poured him coffee, though my own hands trembled as I told him about Carver and the papers, about how my own boy leaned across the table with eyes colder than winter steel. Darnell's smile faded quick, and he leaned forward, voice dropping low. "Those documents you describe, Dad, that ain't just protection. That sounds like a transfer of rights. He was trying to get you to sign it all over." The weight of that hit harder than a hammer. My mind scrambled back to Odessa's voice. "Always read before you sign." Hollis. She had known the world could be cruel. Now her warning echoed too late, and the ache of betrayal from my own son sank deep into bone. By noon, Carver called, smooth as syrup, asking me to meet him at the diner near the highway. Part of me wanted to refuse, but another part thought maybe, just maybe, he'd soften, remember who I was. The place smelled of fried bacon and stale coffee. I slid into the booth across from him, watching as he ordered without glancing my way. "Keep it simple for him," Carver told the waitress, a smirk riding his voice. Laughter drifted from a booth nearby, and though it wasn't aimed at me, it burned just the same. I clenched my jaw, staring at the tabletop as Carver spoke about investments and streamlining, every word dripping with ownership, none with respect. The silence between us grew louder than the hum of the fridge behind the counter. He looked at me like I was already gone, a relic propped in vinyl. That was the moment it sank in. Not only did he not want my guidance, he didn't even see me as a man worth listening to. Just an obstacle standing between him and the glitter of 33 million. Later, back in the stillness of my home, the walls carried the echo of the diner's humiliation. My hand brushed over the folder he had left behind. But I didn't feel fear anymore. Not exactly. Something stronger began to take its place. From the drawer, I pulled out the old notebook Odessa had insisted I keep for important numbers. My fingers landed on the one name I had scribbled years ago, a lawyer who'd helped me once when times were hard. I flipped the page open, staring at the digits, the silence of the house thick around me. Resolve settled in like iron. The man my son thought too frail to fight back wasn't gone yet, thumb hovering over the phone. Hesitation lingered, but so did resolve. The moment I dialed, there would be no turning back. The thumb hovered, then pressed. The tone rang only twice before a calm voice answered. "Samara Lewis." Words came out straighter than expected. "It's Hollis. I think my son's trying to take what isn't his. I need help." She didn't waste time on pity. "Bring what you have, papers, stubs, anything. My office is open this morning." The line went quiet after we hung up, but something inside settled. For the first time since those winning numbers lit up my screen, I'd spoken the truth out loud. I wouldn't be managed, not by Carver, not anymore. And a detail surfaced like a buoy in deep water. The moment I'd signed the back of that ticket at Odessa's counter, that simple scrawl might be the anchor I needed. Samara's office smelled of oak polish and old files. Shelves lined the walls, law books stacked in neat rows. She let me talk without rushing, her pen tapping slowly against a yellow pad. "Lottery cases are about proof," she said finally. "You've got a receipt, your signature, and possibly a witness. That's stronger than you think." From the worn envelope in my jacket, I slid out the stub. A photo I'd snapped weeks ago when the numbers first sank in, and notes I'd scribbled when Carver came pushing contracts. She arranged them on the desk like puzzle pieces. Her eyes narrowed at the folded documents Carver had left. "This clause here, estate transfer, it's not standard. Looks like a maneuver to strip your control. If you'd signed, you'd be handing everything to him." The weight of her words pressed down, but her tone steadied me. She drew up a checklist. Gather receipts, secure a witness, freeze payout if needed. And she gave me one more warning. "Don't confront him before we file. It's riskier than you think." By afternoon, the bell above Odessa's corner store chimed like an old friend's voice. The air smelled of coffee grounds and floor cleaner. She looked up from the counter, eyes widening. "Hollis, back so soon?" I leaned on the glass. "You remember the ticket? I signed it right here." Her brow furrowed, then softened. "Of course. You turned it over. My cameras run all day. You'll want that." Within minutes she was pulling files. promising a USB and a printed log before evening. Her nod carried more weight than she knew. She wasn't just a shopkeeper, but a witness to the truth. Our history stretched back decades. Neighbors, not strangers. Later, confirmation came. The footage showed me signing, timestamp matching the stub. A small breath of relief slid out, but only small. The battle wasn't won. The phone buzzed in my pocket while I drove back. Carver's voice oozed syrup. "Dad, got a new form. Cleaner. Simpler. Just sign. And all this estate mess is off your shoulders." The wheel tightened under my grip. "I'm not signing away my rights." He chuckled. "Too thin. You'll ruin everything if you fight me." "I already have counsel," I said flatly. "Any more pressure, it goes through her." For the first time, he didn't laugh. He only breathed heavy before hanging up. The silence felt louder than the threat. Back at Samara's, I handed her the USB and log. She photographed every page, hashed the files, and filed a preliminary notice to the Lottery Commission. "We'll move for injunctive relief by morning. Expect noise from him," she said, eyes steady. When I signed her retainer, the pen dragged heavier than its weight. A line was drawn, not in ink but in resolve. Night settled warm and thick. Cicadas buzzed from the trees as I sat on the porch. My phone lit with a short message to Darnell. "God help. No more papers from Carver." The red flag on my mailbox clicked upright, my small ritual of drawing boundaries, visible to anyone who cared to look. A car idled across the street. Headlights dim. My phone buzzed again. Unknown sender. "You think a lawyer can save you?" I stood up, jaw set. The porch light hummed above me. This time, I didn't go back inside. The footsteps came first, faint but steady against the gravel drive. Sleep had been fragile all week, so it didn't take much to stir me. By the time I slipped on my slippers and cracked the front door, the night air carried only the hum of cicadas and a faint whiff of cigarette smoke. At my feet lay an envelope, slid halfway under the mat like some kind of secret gift. Inside were neatly folded pages, typed, highlighted, full of sharp lines and clauses I'd seen before. Carver's second offer. This time the words came dressed up like legal promises. Estate protection, management rights, transfers of authority. The same poison, just poured into a shinier bottle. Something in me snapped, not in rage, but in clarity. A laugh slipped out, short, bitter, foreign to my own ears. I walked out back, dropped the papers into an old coffee can, and struck a match. Watching the flames curl and eat the pages felt cleaner than tears. Silence had let him think I was pliable. Fire would tell him otherwise. By morning, ashes were all that remained. But I snapped photos first. I carried them into Samara's office, the weight heavy in my coat pocket. She glanced at the pictures, then back at me. "He's baiting you, Hollis. Once you rattled, once you careless." The calm in her tone pressed against the heat in my chest. Patience is what taught him I'd take whatever he dished out. I'm not sitting quiet anymore. Her eyes narrowed, then softened. "All right, then we escalate." She slid fresh forms across her desk. "Restraining order. It won't stop his tongue, but it'll draw a legal line he can't ignore." For the first time in weeks, my voice steadied. "Good. He needs to see lines now." After leaving her office, I walked the few blocks to Reverend Amos's annex. The old brick still smelled faintly of lemon oil and hymnals. He sat across from me with hands folded, listening as I poured out the whole mess, my son's pressure, the late-night envelopes, the laughter that turned into bitterness. "I'm fighting my own blood, Reverend." He nodded slowly. "You're not the first man to find betrayal at his own table. My brother tried to steal land from me once. It took me years to forgive, but only a day to stand firm." The quiet that followed made my confession easier. "I'm not scared of losing money. I'm scared of disappearing in my own house, of being written off as if I never mattered." He leaned forward, voice low but sharp. "Boundaries aren't betrayal, Hollis. They're dignity. Bring light, not just fire." I left with his words still pressing in my chest, but the next call made them harder to hold on to. Carver's number lit my screen. His voice was sharp from the start. "Dad, enough games. You're coming to my office today. We'll get this done." "No," I said, keeping my tone flat. "From here on, everything goes through my counsel." He chuckled, cold and brittle. "That lawyer's using you, just like I should have. You're too blind to see it." Heat rose to my face. "You'll face me in daylight, Carver, not in shadows." "Not with tricks." The line went dead, but not before a slip. His voice caught on the voicemail recorder. I replayed it twice to be sure. There he was, muttering to someone else about Odessa's footage, saying, "We need to make that tape disappear." By the time I sat back down in Samara's office, my pulse had steadied. I pressed play. Let her hear the words. A thin smile spread across her face. That's intent, Hollis. And intent is leverage. Leaning back in the chair, I felt my shoulders square, my breath level. He doesn't own my silence anymore. That night, I sat on the porch, the air sticky with summer. My thoughts were calmer, but the yard held a new unease. The porch light flickered once, then sputtered out. In the sudden dark, a shadow darted across the yard toward my shed, the one place I kept old files stacked high in boxes. The smell of gasoline drifted faintly on the breeze. The sharp sting of gasoline hung in the dawn air, sharp enough to pull me out of bed before the alarm. My feet slid into old slippers as I followed the smell out back. The shed door, always locked at night, gaped open like a wound. Inside, black streaks licked the walls where smoke had eaten through boxes of records, piles of folders, old tax returns, bank slips. Even notes from the day I bought that ticket were scattered in half-burned heaps. But what stopped me cold was the charred frame of a photo. Odessa and my wife, smiling in their Sunday dresses outside the church. The top half was gone, curled in ash, but I saved the bottom, pressing it flat against my chest. Whoever struck the match hadn't just aimed at paper. They aimed at memory. My phone shook in my hand as I called Samara. She answered sharp and steady. No hesitation. "Don't touch anything else. Take pictures. Every angle." "Bag that photo if you can." The fire department rolled in not long after, red lights bouncing off the damp grass. One young officer sniffed and shook his head. "Accelerant. Somebody wanted this to go fast." Another, with a smirk, muttered something about domestic disputes. I bit my tongue hard, then said low and clear, "This ain't a family squabble. This is arson tied to a $33 million fraud. You write that down." By noon, I was standing beside Samara on the courthouse steps, the Houston heat pressing down heavy. She had the folder under one arm, evidence tucked neat inside. Carver came strutting up with his lawyer, some slick-haired man in a blue suit. Carver's grin wasn't joy. It was the grin of a man who thought he'd already won. We locked eyes. I didn't blink. Samara stepped forward, her tone like polished steel. "You've been served." She placed the injunction notice into the lawyer's hand. Carver leaned toward me, voice dipped low so no one else could hear. "You're too old to fight a system built for me." I let his words hang in the air, then turned without answering. Silence can weigh more than thunder. The judge didn't dismiss us outright. Instead, an emergency hearing was set. Carver's lawyer tried to wave off the evidence as irrelevant clutter, but Samara's voice cut through. "Arson isn't clutter, Your Honor." I saw the judge's pen pause over his notes. That was enough for today. When the sun dipped, I drove over to Odessa's corner store. The bell chimed like always, and for a moment, I was just a neighbor again. She handed me a small flash drive, wrapped in a receipt. "I pulled a second copy," she said, her eyes soft but firm. "Figured you might need 2 lifelines." I put it in my pocket. Heavier than it should have been, that little piece of plastic carried proof, and maybe even salvation. Back home. I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, signing affidavits Samara had prepared. My fingers traced the grooves in the wood where Odessa once set down Sunday bread. I whispered under my breath. He tried to burn my past to control my future, but ashes still tell a story. The knock came late, too late for neighbors, too formal for friends. A uniformed officer stood on my porch, papers in hand. "Summons," he said, "filed by your son, claiming fraudulent ownership." I took the envelope, closed the door, and leaned against it. So this was the line. Not just threats, not just fire. He was dragging me into court. The courthouse air always felt colder than it should, like the marble and steel had soaked up every argument ever shouted in those halls. When I stepped into the chamber, the stares followed like a shadow. Some looked curious, others dismissive, as if they'd already decided which side of the story an old man like me belonged on. Carver sat at his lawyer's table, posture straight, suit sharp, face unreadable. He didn't look at me when I walked by, and maybe that cut deeper than if he had. The silence between us said enough. When the judge called us to order, Carver's lawyer rose, smooth as silk. His words were polished but aimed to wound. He painted me as frail, confused, and easily manipulated. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not about greed, but about protecting an elderly man who no longer distinguishes between memory and fantasy." My jaw tightened, but Samara placed a calming hand near mine. "Not yet," her look said. I sat still, but inside I was burning. The judge nodded but didn't interrupt. I realized the tactic. They wanted me to explode, to play the part they'd written for me. Samara stood when her turn came. No theatrics, just clarity. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of proof. My client purchased the ticket, signed it in view of a witness, and retains documentation. What his son seeks is control, not truth." When she set the USB drive on the table, Carver shifted, too quickly. His lawyer objected, talking about chain of custody, but the judge allowed it provisionally. Samara explained the footage, timestamp, signature, and Odessa watching me turn the ticket, across the benches. I caught Carver's eyes. His lips moved, muttering under his breath. I couldn't hear the words, but the court reporter's head turned sharp, pen scratching faster. He'd slipped, mentioning the footage before Samara had described it. My chest swelled. For once, his own mouth had given me a weapon. When recess was called, the room exhaled. I made my way to the cafeteria, just wanting coffee to steady my hands. Sitting alone at a corner table, I tried to breathe through the anger. That's when a stranger slid a folded note across the table. "Stop pushing! Last warning!" By the time I looked up, he was gone. Security couldn't find him on cameras. The paper trembled in my hand, but not from fear, from fury. Carver wasn't acting alone. He'd built a network, shadows I couldn't yet see. Leaving the building later, the afternoon sun felt harsher, bouncing off glass and asphalt. A car rolled slow behind me, windows tinted too dark. My steps quickened, but before I had to face it alone, Darnell appeared at the curb. "Granddad," he said, stepping between me and the street, "you're not walking home alone today." No words were needed at first. We walked side by side, silence heavier than anything said in court. Finally, his voice broke it. He offered me money to switch sides. My heart sank, then steadied when he added, "I told him no, I won't sell you out." Relief mixed with anger, but also a thread of pride. My grandson had drawn his own line. The bond that Carver tried to poison still had roots. That night, sitting at my table with papers spread before me, I let the anger harden into something sharper. They tried to strip me of sanity, scorch my name, shadow my steps. But silence was no longer my shield. My voice would be. The phone rang late. Samara's voice, brisk but steady. "We've been moved up. The full injunction hearing is tomorrow morning." I looked out the window at the night sky. The time for shadows was ending. By dawn, the truth would have to stand in open court. The morning sun struck the glass of the courthouse like a warning bell. Stepping out of the cab with Samara at my side, I felt the weight of every eye turning toward us. Reporters clustered at the steps, microphones aimed like rifles. Carver strutted ahead, his lawyers in sharp suits flanking him as though he were a dignitary. He didn't glance back at me once. Inside, the benches were already filled with curious faces, neighbors, strangers, and folks who probably never set foot in a courthouse unless a spectacle was promised. I sat straighter, letting their stares roll over me. They weren't here for justice. They were here to see a man like me either rise or crumble. The judge entered, robe swaying, voice steady as he called the case. Carver's attorney rose immediately, smug in tone. Your Honor, we have new evidence that calls into question Mr. Hollis's claim to the ticket. My chest tightened, but I fixed my eyes on the judge. They had planned another strike. Cross-examination came swift. I was called to the stand, palms steady against the rail. Carver's lawyer circled me with questions sharp as needles. Mr. Hollis, do you recall the exact date you purchased the ticket? Yes, I said, voice firm. Isn't it true you often confuse dates, even simple appointments? His words dripped with condescension. I know what I signed. And when I signed it, age doesn't erase truth. He smirked, holding up papers with a dramatic flair. Then explain this document. A transfer form, dated before the winning numbers were even announced. Signed by you. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes. The page looked slick, too clean. Samara stood at once. Objection. We request immediate forensic review. The watermark is dated after the drawing. Your Honor. The judge examined it briefly, eyebrows tightening. The defense faltered. Whispers rose in the gallery as the forged nature became clear. My son's team had tried to paint me as confused, but the lie collapsed under its own ink. Then Odessa entered, small in stature but upright as a soldier. She took the stand with steady eyes. I saw him sign the back of that ticket, she said, voice firm. I rang it up myself, and I have the purchase log. Her hands produced the book, along with a USB drive. The courtroom stirred. Carver leapt up, voice breaking across the silence. She's lying! Gasps spread like wildfire. Even the judge's gavel strike couldn't silence the murmurs. Carver's outburst didn't just challenge Odessa. It exposed the disdain he carried for anyone who didn't serve his agenda. The judge ordered a recess to review the video evidence. We left the courtroom, and in a quiet conference room, Samara produced Carver's own voicemail, the one where he schemed about Odessa's footage. The judge listened, stone-faced. The slip Carver had made earlier about knowing what was on that footage sealed the connection. This borders on perjury, the judge muttered, and obstruction. Carver's lawyer stammered excuses, but the damage was done. When we reconvened, the afternoon light slanted low through the tall windows. The air was thick with anticipation. The judge's ruling came clear and sharp. The injunction is granted. Funds are frozen pending fraud investigation. Mr. Hollis retains standing as original claimant. This court will not tolerate manipulation. Reporters surged as soon as the gavel fell. Cameras flashed. Carver stormed out, face twisted with fury, shouting at his attorneys. For the first time in months, my shoulders felt lighter, the air less heavy on my chest. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first taste of justice. On the courthouse steps, the crowd pressed around us. I pushed through slowly, Samara shielding me from the barrage of questions. Carver's voice cut through the chaos, loud and venomous. This isn't over, old man. He spat the words across the parking lot, and though his lawyers tugged him toward their car, his glare clung to me like a curse. The truth had been dragged into daylight, but his threat carried a promise. Our war was leaving the courtroom and spilling into darker places. The phone rang before dawn, sharp and loud in the stillness of my small apartment. I fumbled for it, heart pounding, a knot already waiting in my stomach. The voice on the other end was clipped and formal, news I'd dreaded but expected. Carver was out on bond. The words from the courthouse parking lot still echoed inside me. This isn't over, old man. Blood's thicker than law. Now it felt less like anger, and more like a promise carved into stone. I sat there in the half-dark, listening to the silence after the call ended. Somewhere in that silence, I asked myself a question that hurt worse than the threat itself. How had my boy turned into this? Once, his laughter had filled my backyard while he chased fireflies. Now, he was gathering shadows around him like a crown. By mid-morning, the apartment no longer felt like mine. Odessa came over first, her hands carrying a grocery bag, the scent of cornbread clinging to her. She didn't have to say much. Her eyes held the kind of worry only neighbors who'd known you your whole life could show. Reverend Amos followed, Bible tucked under his arm, his steps heavy as though carrying my burdens too. We sat around the small kitchen table. Amos's voice was steady. Blood can curse as well as bless, Hollis. Sometimes the hardest thing is to love without letting the curse spread. Before I could answer, Samara arrived, legal pad in hand, suit jacket folded over her arm. She spoke with the calm precision I'd come to trust. "The restraining order paperwork is in motion," she said, her pen tapping against the table. "He won't be able to get near you legally once it's granted." But law and family rarely fit together clean. Just as I began to breathe easier, a faint scrape came at the door. I rose, opened it, and there on the floor was a folded sheet of paper, jagged handwriting across the front. "You'll regret crossing your own son." I stood there, holding the note, while Odessa gasped and Reverend Amos murmured a prayer. Samara took a photo before sliding it into her file. My hands shook, not from fear alone, but from the shame that my own child would send words like this to his father. The knock that came in the afternoon was softer, almost hesitant. Tanisha stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, eyes downcast. My daughter. She stepped inside, avoiding the others' gazes, and we sat. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Daddy, Carver's lost, but he's still my brother. How do we fix what's broken?" I searched her face, the same one I'd kissed goodnight when she was little, and felt the weight of her words. "Love without truth becomes poison," I told her gently. "If I keep pretending, I'm not loving either of you. I'm just feeding the lie." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want to lose both of you." Something shifted then. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and hesitated. "There's something I haven't told you." On the screen, a recording glowed. Carver's voice filled the room, harsh and angry, bragging about forging documents, about fixing the timeline so no one would doubt him. She whispered, "I couldn't carry this secret anymore." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Gratitude and grief tangled in my chest. My children were tearing each other apart, and I was the battlefield. Night fell heavy. The hum of the streetlights outside blended with the restless beat of my heart. Then came the sound, shuffling near the parking lot, low voices, laughter that didn't belong. I peeked through the blinds. Carver stood outside, 2 men beside him, their shoulders tense, their eyes scanning the windows. I kept the lights off and whispered to Samara on the phone, my voice barely above a breath. "They're here." Before Samara could answer, headlights cut across the lot. A car door slammed, and there was Tanisha, stepping out fast, her silhouette sharp against the glow. "Carver!" she shouted, her voice ringing through the night. I froze, fear locking me to the floor. My daughter, facing my son, between me and danger. Their voices clashed in the dark. Carver's rage spilled out, words dripping venom. He stole from us first. His whole life was choosing others over me. That money's mine. Tanisha stood firm. "You stole from yourself. Carver. Daddy gave us everything he had. And when that wasn't enough, you took more." The men who had come with him shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Carver pressed on, shouting about betrayal, about being the forgotten son. And then Tanisha lifted her phone, thumb pressing play. His own confession filled the air, undeniable, damning. The men cursed under their breath and slipped away, leaving Carver exposed. He froze, the color draining from his face as his sister's eyes burned into his. I stood at the window, tears threatening to fall. My children's war, I thought, had bled into my twilight years. Sirens wailed, growing louder by the second. Blue lights painted the lot in harsh strokes. Carver turned his head, eyes locking on mine through the window. His lips moved, every syllable etched with hate. "You'll pay for this, even if it kills me." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, the weight of broken promises heavy on my chest. Morning light barely touched the blinds when the echoes of last night's chaos stirred awake in my chest. The sirens. Carver's eyes filled with rage, and the words he threw like stones. "You'll pay for this, even if it kills me." Those words still pressed against my ribs like a weight I couldn't set down. Odessa brewed coffee in the tiny kitchen of my rented apartment, The scent of roasted beans filled the air, but the warmth did little to calm the storm inside me. She set the cup in front of me gently. "How do I keep my soul steady?" I asked, voice low. "When my own son wants to see me fall." She rested her hand on mine, the lines of her palm rough but grounding. "By remembering you didn't choose this war, you only chose truth." Reverend Amos, sitting nearby with his Bible closed on his lap, nodded slowly. "You prayed for truth, Hollis. Don't turn away now that it's standing right in front of you." I breathed deep, the steam of the coffee blurring my sight for a moment. My body felt older than 78 that morning, but the resolve was steady. Today the courthouse would hear Tanisha's recording, and whatever came after would carve into the bones of our family forever. The courthouse halls buzzed like a hive. Reporters, onlookers, curious locals, they all packed into the benches as though justice was a play they'd bought tickets to. Carver strutted in with his lawyer at his side, wearing the same arrogance he'd carried since childhood when he thought rules bent around him. Samara leaned closer. "Stay steady. Let the truth speak." I gave a short nod, though my hands were trembling when I set them on the polished wood table. The judge called the session to order, and soon Carver's lawyer rose with that slick grin, trying to twist every shadow into doubt. But then Samara stood, voice clear and sharp as glass. "Your Honor, the defense has painted Mr. Hollis as confused, unstable, incapable, but this recording," she held up the small device, "will speak for itself." The audio filled the courtroom. Carver's voice, sharp and impatient, rattled through the speakers. "Yeah, I forged it. The old man won't know. By the time he figures it out, the money's mine." The words cut through me, though I'd already known their truth. Still, hearing my own son confess before strangers made the wound raw again, gasps rippled through the crowd. Carver shot to his feet, his face twisted. That was taken out of context. "Sit down, Mr. Carver," the judge ordered, gavel striking hard. For the first time, I didn't flinch when Carver shouted. I sat taller, breathing evenly, the ache in my chest hidden behind steady eyes. The judge's ruling came swift. "All access to disputed funds is hereby frozen pending a full fraud investigation. Any attempt to tamper further will result in criminal charges." Carver slammed his fists against the table, rage boiling, but I only exhaled. Vindication burned warm through me, though grief lingered at its edges. Outside the courtroom, Tanisha collapsed into my arms, tears wetting my jacket. "Daddy, I never wanted it to come to this." "He's my brother. I thought I could pull him back." I stroked her hair gently. "Love without truth becomes poison, baby. You gave him a chance. He made his choice." Odessa joined us, her eyes sharp. "He won't take this lying down. Hollis, be ready." Her words hit heavy. Truth had won around, but Carver wasn't finished. The weight followed me home. As I walked up the apartment steps, a stabbing pain gripped my chest. My breath caught, knees buckling. Reverend Amos caught me under the arm, his voice urgent. "Stay with me, Hollis." The next minutes blurred, sirens, bright lights, a gurney rushing me down hospital halls. I whispered to God, "Don't let me leave this world with my family torn apart." By evening, I lay in a hospital bed, monitors beeping steady but low. Odessa sat beside me, her hand cool against my skin. "I thought the weight of justice would free me," I whispered, staring at the ceiling tiles. "But it's crushing me instead." The nurse stepped in quietly, chart in hand. "Stress like this could do permanent damage. Mr. Hollis, you need rest, peace, something your current situation isn't giving you." I closed my eyes, the truth of it heavier than any verdict. Then came the shock. The nurse hesitated before speaking again. "Your son Carver was admitted tonight. Bar fight. He's stable, but he's here." My heart clenched in a different way. Justice had found him, but had it spared me? I turned my face toward the window, city lights flickering beyond the glass, and wondered if this fight was nearing its end, or only turning into something darker. The hospital room was too quiet. The beep of the heart monitor reminded me of the fragility I never liked to admit. Reverend Amos sat by the window, his Bible open but unread. He leaned forward, his voice low. Guard your soul, Hollis. Your body's telling you it's tired, but your spirit has to decide if it'll bend or break. Odessa touched my hand gently. Carver's here too. He's down the hall. Are you ready to see him? I shook my head, breath shallow. Not yet. If I see him now, it won't be words that come out of me. The resolve stiffened in my chest. I wasn't done fighting. Not with my family. Not with the truth. The next morning, Samara came into the room with files tucked under her arm. We need to head to the courthouse. Carver made another move. By noon, we stood again under the heavy lights of Harris County's courtroom. Carver's lawyer had a slick smile that made my stomach turn. Your Honor, he said, we're filing for guardianship. Mr. Hollis cannot manage his finances responsibly due to advanced age and recent health complications. My chest burned hotter than any angina ever had. Carver looked at me without shame, like I was already buried. The judge frowned, tapping his pen. Samara stood. Your Honor, this is a blatant attempt to seize control of funds under ongoing fraud investigation. We have evidence of bribes to a courthouse clerk. The air grew heavy. The judge's glare landed on Carver. One more misstep, and I'll hold you in contempt. Carver smirked. I'm just trying to protect my father from himself. The lie landed like a knife. Outside the courtroom, Tanisha crumbled into tears against my chest. Daddy, I never wanted him to go this far. I stroked her hair, but doubt crept in. Baby, you stood by him longer than you should have. Did you know more than you've told me? She pulled back, eyes wide. No, Daddy, I swear, I was blind, not complicit. Later, Odessa and I sat in the courthouse cafeteria, silence thick as the bitter coffee between us. Family's supposed to be the shield, I muttered. Instead, I feel like they're sharpening the blade. By evening, Samara pulled me into her office. On her desk were photos. Carver's hidden condo, a sleek building, glass walls shining like sin. Inside, a safe stuffed with draft wills, papers smeared with forgery, even records of insurance schemes. Samara slid one across the desk. Look at the witness line. Hollis. The name scrawled there sent my stomach lurching. It wasn't Carver's. It was someone else in the family, someone I trusted. Shock hollowed me out. So it's not just him. Samara's voice stayed steady. The web is wider, and now we know. That night, back in my hospital bed, I whispered a prayer. Lord, I don't know if I want reconciliation or revelation, but give me strength to walk whichever path you've chosen. The phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message glowed. Stop digging, or the hospital won't keep you safe. My hand tightened around the phone. Betrayal wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. It had followed me into the night. The courthouse felt heavier that morning, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of every prayer I had whispered over the past months. My steps were steady, but inside, I carried the memory of sleepless nights, threats slipped under doors, and the shed reduced to ashes. Beside me walked Samara, her file tucked under one arm like a shield, Odessa with her quiet strength, and Reverend Amos, murmuring scripture that steadied my heart. When Carver entered, I barely recognized him. His shoulders slumped. His eyes darted around as though searching for allies that no longer stood with him. Tanisha walked behind, her face pale, her gaze fixed on the floor. The judge's gavel struck, and silence fell. Evidence from Carver's condo, the forged wills, the drafts of false filings, the hidden funds, was laid out plain for all to see. Samara spoke with the calm of a woman who had carried truth to battle many times before. Every page turned, every line of testimony, pushed Carver further into a corner. The judge's voice cut sharp. Guardianship denied. Injunction upheld. Fraud charges advanced. My breath left me like a storm had finally passed. Carver snapped. His voice filled the room, cracked with rage. He was nothing without me. His words spiraled into shouts, his hands thrashing until bailiffs gripped his arms. I didn't move. I didn't need to. His collapse spoke louder than anything I could have said. Tanisha sobbed quietly in the front row, torn between love for her brother and shame for what he had become. For the first time, I didn't rush to comfort her. Some lessons are carried heavier when silence meets them. When it ended, I stepped into the hall, shoulders lighter than I had felt in months. Odessa touched my arm. "You held your ground," she whispered. Reverend Amos nodded. "Justice without bitterness is the hardest road. Hollis, don't let anger finish what Carver began." Tanisha approached me slowly. Her voice trembled. "Daddy, I didn't want him to sink this far. I'm sorry for what I kept from you." I studied her face, searching for the girl I once tucked into bed with bedtime stories. "I'll forgive you," I told her, "but only when you choose truth every day, not just when it hurts less." She nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks. That evening, I returned not to a mansion or a high-rise apartment, but to the small brick house where it all began. Neighbors waved, some ashamed they once believed Carver's lies, others smiling with relief. Children played in the yard across the street. For the first time in a long while, peace settled on me like a quilt over tired shoulders. The $33 million was still caught in courts, tied in knots that might take years to unravel. But sitting on my porch, cicadas humming in the night air, I realized it didn't matter. Wealth wasn't the number written on a check. It was the dignity of standing when someone tried to break you, the strength of saying no when silence seemed easier, the love that survived even when family turned against itself. I spoke to the camera of my mind, the way I spoke to myself when loneliness threatened. I lost my son's loyalty, but I found my own strength. Money tests the heart. Mine was bruised but not broken. If you hold on to dignity, no betrayal can rob you of peace. The lesson wasn't just for me. It was for every elder who gave too much and asked for too little. For every parent made to feel small when years of sacrifice should have earned them honor. Guard your dignity. Protect your rights. But do not let bitterness take root where peace could still grow. As the stars blinked above Houston, I leaned back in my chair and let the night settle. Carver's words still echoed somewhere in memory, but they no longer ruled me. "I may have lost a son," I whispered into the quiet, "but I gained freedom, and sometimes that is the richest inheritance of all.